The painting you're looking at is Interior of a Kitchen by Martin Drolling, created in 1815. Sunlight pours through a window, illuminating copper pots. A woman prepares food. Everything feels warm, peaceful, bathed in golden afternoon light. But look closer at those shadows. The deep browns in the fabric folds, the rich darkness pooling in the corners. That color, that warm, glowing brown, it wasn't made from earth or clay. It was made from people. Ground human remains, stolen corpses shipped from Egypt, bodies that were supposed to rest for eternity, crushed into powder and mixed with oil. The shadows in this kitchen were once wrapped in linen, buried in sand, mourned by families who believed their dead would walk in the afterlife. Instead, they ended up in a paint tube. And here's why you need to keep watching. This practice didn't end in the 1800s like most people think. By the end of this video, I will show you how human remains might still be hiding in paintings you could see in a modern gallery today, and you would never know it. This is the story of mummy brown, a color made from the dead, used by some of history's greatest artists, and it's far more disturbing than anyone wants to admit. Before mummy brown became paint, it was medicine. They called it mummia, and you could buy it at any pharmacy in medieval Europe. Walk into one of these old shops, and there, sitting between bottles of mercury and bloodletting tools, you'd find a jar labeled True Mummy. Open it, and inside you'd find pieces of blackened, dried human flesh. Doctors prescribed it for everything: headaches, plague, depression. The logic made sense to them. Mummies were preserved with bitumen, and physicians convinced themselves this preservation had healing power. It didn't work, of course, but demand exploded anyway. By the 1500s, Egypt's ancient tombs were being systematically looted. Businessmen in Cairo made fortunes breaking open sarcophagi and shipping the contents to Europe. Ships crossed the Mediterranean loaded with human remains like cargo. But here's where this story takes a truly horrifying turn. There weren't enough ancient mummies to satisfy European demand, so the Egyptian merchants did something that still shocks historians today. They faked it. They took fresh corpses, executed criminals, plague victims, poor people who died in the streets, and turned them into counterfeit mummies. They dried the bodies in the desert sun, wrapped them in old linen, covered them in chemicals to make them look ancient, then sold them to European buyers as authentic thousand-year-old pharaohs. Think about that. Wealthy families in London, Paris, Venice were eating murdered criminals and recent plague victims while believing they were taking ancient Egyptian medicine. But then, sometime in the 17th century, someone made a discovery. When you ground mummy into extremely fine powder and mixed it with linseed oil, it created a color unlike any other paint. A rich, transparent brown with an almost glowing quality. You could layer it over other colors and it would enhance them. It gave paintings depth, warmth, a luminous quality that made skin look alive and shadows look three-dimensional. Artists started buying it from the same pharmacies. The price went up dramatically, and slowly the dead stopped being medicine and became art supplies instead. This is how Mummy Brown was born. Edward Burne-Jones was one of Victorian England's most celebrated painters. For years he'd been using a particular brown paint, his favorite, labeled simply fine brown. Then one day, someone told him the truth. That brown paint he loved, the one he'd been layering over angels' faces and gods' robes,
It was made from ground human corpses. According to witnesses, Burne-Jones went completely pale. He couldn't speak. He set down his brush with trembling hands and just stared at the paint tube. He'd been painting with stolen bodies, with people ripped from their graves, crushed into powder, and sold to him without his knowledge. Then he did something extraordinary. He gathered every single tube of mummy brown he owned. He carried them outside into his garden and began digging a hole, a small grave just large enough for the paint tubes. He placed them inside, one by one, carefully, respectfully. Then he spoke words over them. What exactly, nobody recorded, but witnesses described it as a funeral, a proper burial for the nameless dead who'd been violated twice. Burne-Jones filled in the grave, patted down the earth with his own hands, and stood there in silence. Then he walked back to his studio and refused to ever touch Mummy Brown again. But Edward Burne-Jones was unusual. Most artists kept using it. Eugene Delacroix, Lawrence Alma Tadema, John Singer Sargent, possibly even Rembrandt, they all likely used Mummy Brown. They knew, or they suspected, or they deliberately chose not to ask questions, because the paint was simply too extraordinary to give up. Nothing else created that depth, that glow, that richness.
By the early 20th century, Egypt started protecting its archaeological sites with actual laws. The flow of bodies slowed to a trickle. Paint manufacturers quietly started making substitutes. But the true end of Mummy Brown came in 1964 with a single interview that shocked the art world. A Time magazine journalist asked Geoffrey Robeson Walker, director of one of London's oldest art supply companies, "Do you still manufacture Mummy Brown?" His answer: "We might have a few odd limbs lying around somewhere, but not enough to make any more paint." A few odd limbs lying around, said with the same casual tone you'd use to describe leftover supplies in a closet. The reaction was immediate and furious. C. Robeson & Co. permanently discontinued Mummy Brown. But now we face an impossible question. What do we do with artwork made from stolen human bodies? These aren't minor works. These are masterpieces hanging in the Louvre, the National Gallery, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're worth tens of millions of dollars. They're considered culturally invaluable. And they're made from corpses that were stolen, ground into powder, and sold without anyone's permission. Are they still art? Or are they crime scenes preserved under museum lighting, mass graves hanging on walls? The museums don't want to discuss it. The information plaques never mention it, because once you admit a painting contains stolen human remains, you open up questions nobody wants to answer. And here's what makes this genuinely nightmarish. We still don't know which paintings contain Mummy Brown. The pigment doesn't show up clearly on scans. It hides within the layers, chemically almost identical to other organic brown paints, which means every time you stand in front of a 19th century painting with deep, luminous browns, you're looking at a mystery. It might be regular earth pigment. It might be an Egyptian priest. The museum won't tell you, because even today, they don't know how to handle this truth. But I made you a promise at the start. I said I'd show you how this practice didn't actually end in the 1800s. So let me keep that promise. Mummy Brown never truly died. It evolved. In the late 20th century, decades after that infamous interview, some artists began trying to revive the pigment, not with Egyptian mummies, that supply was gone, but with other human remains. medical cadavers from university anatomy programs, cremation ashes from funeral homes, anonymous ground bone purchased from suppliers operating in legal gray zones. It's rare, it's hidden, it's never openly advertised, but it exists today. Right now, there are craftspeople who insist there's something irreplaceable about human-based pigments, a tonal quality, a texture, a presence that synthetic chemicals cannot duplicate. Some contemporary artists working with what they call ethical human remains, people who donated their bodies for this purpose, who signed legal documents, they exhibit their work in galleries, modern galleries, the kind you might visit on a weekend afternoon. Which means the next time you're standing in a contemporary art exhibition, looking at an abstract painting with deep, rich browns, you might be standing inches away from human remains, and you would never know. The label won't say it, the gallery certainly won't advertise it, because we still haven't figured out how to talk about this honestly, how to reconcile our horror at 19th century grave robbery with our appreciation for art that uses essentially the same material, just with paperwork and consent forms this time. The shadows haven't really changed, just the legal documentation.
The next time you visit a museum, take a moment to really look at those 19th century paintings. Notice how light passes through the brown glazes. Notice the depth, the warmth. And ask yourself, if beauty requires sacrifice, whose sacrifice are we willing to accept? If you discovered that your favorite painting was made from stolen human remains ground into powder without consent, would you want it removed from the museum? Or is the violation somehow part of what makes it valuable now? There's no simple answer. Maybe there's no answer at all. But the question itself matters. Because Mummy Brown isn't just a story about the past. It's about what we're still willing to do, what we're still willing to ignore, what we're still willing to display under museum lighting in the name of greatness and beauty. The dead are still there, mixed into the paint, layered into the shadows, watching from inside the canvas.